Hello and welcome to the Fundamentals of Lute Playing. My name is Laudon Schuett, and today I'm just going to give you a couple tips on how to improve your legato playing. For those of you who have a classical guitar background, maybe you've learned all of these things and this video isn't super useful, but because I'm trying to make this a very thorough, or at least as thorough as I can, video program, I do want to make sure that those players who are beginners or maybe have less experience with this get a chance to kind of hear about this. Now, legato, for those of you who don't know, is just smooth. How to smoothly connect notes one to the other. Now, what does that mean? So, for example, if I were to play this note short like that, those are staccato notes, and there is definitely a time and a place for staccato. We're going to have notes of all sorts of lengths, but I found that what's more challenging for students is to play legato or smoothly and connected, and I'll give you an example of that. Now what you'll notice is each sound lasts until you get to the next sound, whereas with staccato, we're cutting it off. Now, there is some vibration on the other strings, so I'll cover that just so you can hear what true staccato sounds like. Now, the vibration is just a sympathetic vibration. When you make a sound with a string, it can set off other strings, and we're not trying to stop that, but I just wanted to make sure you heard very clearly what staccato was. It's the shortening of the note length, the intentional shortening, or usually intentional, it should be intentional shortening of the note length. Legato is to smoothly connect the notes, and all of this will be very, very useful in your interpretation and your playing. I talked about some of this in the rhetoric episode. Legato, I think, is really challenging, especially for beginners, and we're going to talk why that is, and then I'm also going to bring up some more advanced legato techniques. Now, the reason I think legato can sometimes be challenging is it requires careful listening and coordination. So, for example, if I play this note and I sort of just move on to the next note without thinking about it. So if you're just thinking point, 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 you may not be hearing what an audience member hears, which is those notes are being shortened. You've done your pluck and you've moved on. And as I've mentioned in videos before, what we want to do is pluck and listen. So making sure we hear that. And when we hear something where it's unintentionally short, we make sure we fix that. Now, how do we fix it? So what we have to do is we have to keep the pressure down on the finger, keep the note ringing. So step one is to take a note and just practice holding it and listening to it. That's what a note sounds like when it holds. And then we try changing notes. And what we're trying to do is hold this note down right up until the moment we pluck the next one. And this can be challenging because for beginners, you might do something like this. You put your right finger down early, or you put your left finger down first and then you pluck, or you lift a little pressure off of that. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that the left-hand finger comes down exactly when we pluck. So we're going to go hold, pluck, and fret. Hold. So both hands are simultaneous. And that can be a little bit tricky. It takes some time to work that out. So what you want to do is just go very slowly. And of course, once you've got it down at a slow speed, make sure you can do it fast, because sometimes what happens is we get it comfortable at a slow speed. And then we try it fast. and we kind of accidentally get some staccato. For me personally, I actually find it harder to be legato at a slow speed because it gives you more time to accidentally touch a string or screw something up. This is not necessarily something you need to do a special exercise for. You can do this with your music. You know, if you're playing a treble or something like the Scots tune, making sure it's not getting staccato unintentionally. And like I said, there will be plenty of places where we do want staccato. We talked about in the rhetoric episode with leaps. If we're on a weak beat going to a strong beat, the weak beat will be shortened. You can do that with an open string, or you can do it with a closed. So there are going to be lots of places where staccato is musical and absolutely appropriate. But getting a nice legato sound is very, very important, especially for a beginner. For some more advanced players, what I would say is a few more tips here. There are two other kind of situations where I think it can be very helpful. I should say three more situations. So one of them is if you have a chord and you need to move to another chord. So let's say we've got this D minor chord and we need to move to an A minor chord. Now you might be getting a very good sound on this D minor chord, and you might be getting a very good sound on this A minor chord, but something's happening in between. You might hear a little sound, maybe the fingers are lifting up, something is kind of not quite working. And you want to find a way to smooth it out. So a couple things to understand. As listeners, we tend to prioritize the notes that we're hearing, and there are ways to get around that. You can change those priorities as a composer and as a performer. But in general, when you play a chord for someone, the ear really clings to that highest note. So if you cut that highest note short, it's really obvious. It's really, really obvious. So if I do something like this, it's pretty clear that we've had this sort of, and it's not legato. It's not as long and smooth and clear, and so we need to find a way to fix that. How do we do that? So the standard fingerings here, we have 1, 4, 2, and this we have 3, 2, 1. So one of the tricks you can do when you're changing chords is try to adjust the fingerings so that the highest note is held for the longest possible time. So in this case, I'll give you an example of what I mean. You may be playing these chords and just going to your sort of standard shapes. And I did talk a little bit in the 3-voice chord video about getting comfortable using different fingerings. So one thing you can do is just change the fingerings so that the second finger, which has the highest note of the first chord, doesn't lift so quickly. Because that second finger needs to be used. If you're using standard fingerings, what you're doing is you're sort of lifting that second finger to get to the third chorus, and that's cutting that high note off. So instead, change the fingering of the second chord so that it's 4, 3, 1, and then we get this. So that's being held the maximum amount of time. And that type of fingering can be really, really, really helpful when you're playing a piece that has a lot of chords in a row and the line, that top voice, is being chopped short, or you're getting unintentional staccatos. Sometimes we want the staccatos, like I said. And of course, we can compose a piece or play a piece so that a bass line is emphasized, or you'll get things with like drones, obviously the emphasis is on the lower note, but in general you will find, especially when just playing chords, that the audience really wants to hear, or what they latch to, is that high note. So if you can preserve that high note, you can get away with some sneaky business in the lower voices. Two other things actually. So the next thing is in textures that are like moving thirds. whatever right hand style you use, if you're using P and I, like I am here, or if you're using I and M, or P and M. What I've found is that you will get the most legato sound if you have guide fingers. If you use the same fingering and you slide around, versus doing something where you change fingerings, that tends to get a little choppy. So even something like this tends to be a little choppy. So I will actually, with parallel thirds, shift a lot more than I normally would. In general, we try to avoid shifting, especially on weak beats and things like that. But when it comes to parallel thirds, this is a little bit of a rule breaking. I find that so the best thing is to have the same fingering. So let's say you're going like this. And you'll see I had to do a little compression here, but it's the same fingers. That tends to get a really legato sound. Versus doing something like that. The next best thing is if you can have the guide finger be the highest note. So for example, if you're coming from 2 and 1 here, your guide finger is 1, so that's the higher note of the pair. So that tends to sort of follow the rule we were talking about before, with like the ear sort of naturally gravitates toward fixating on that higher note. So if the high notes can be nice and smooth, that's really, really helpful. And then the next best thing is that the lower note has a guide to it. And sometimes you just have to do it. You might have a situation like this, where if you had to decide between, you can do this smoothly, but you can also. So something to think about, experiment. We'll talk more about some right hand options. When do we use I and M for those thirds? We talked about it a little bit with the Tienta Laura piece with the fa la la section, but there are different right hand options as well for close play, and you can use all of them, just change them during the context. Now, the last little tip I was going to give you is leaps. Now, I'm not talking about musical leaps. So, for example, I just gave you that demonstration of a musical leap where we're going G, C, and we have a note that we do want to shorten. Or, you don't have to, but it's nice to shorten it. Or you could even change the length of shortening so it's not so extreme. I think, as I've mentioned in the past, it depends on the tempo. You make the note shorter the faster the piece is. In this case, what I actually want to talk about, though, is a physical leap that doesn't have a musical leap. So let me give you an example. So let's say we were going to focus on these two notes, F to E. But let's say we had to play the F here. Let's say we're here, because we're playing a chord like this, a little D minor chord. And then we need to get over here for some reason. Let's say the next chord in the piece is there. Now it's a little bit of an extreme color change, but it happens. So we're doing this. And what we want to avoid is something like where this note gets shortened just because we happen to be way up high here. So what you want to do in this situation, first, make sure that it is musically close. F to E, F to E. So what we want to do is we play the chord and we hold it as long as possible before we make the shift. One of the other things you'll notice that I'm doing as I'm repeating this is I'm also trying to work out too much, any excess noise that happens when I shift. So I'm waiting till the last second. I'm going to do this faster. Now Now, what's happening if I slow this down? So, when we've talked about this a little bit with difficult spots and other things, you're going to find as these videos go on that more and more things connect and relate. And so, if you've watched a couple videos, you'll see, oh, that's related to something we talked about before. And I discussed this to some degree in, I think it was the learning your piece video and dealing with problem spots. But here, what you'll notice is I've got fingers 2 and 3 in this chord, and they're going to 2 and 3 here. So what I'm trying to do, but 3 needs to move up to the 4th course. So as I'm shifting, I'm maintaining the shape, but bringing 3 into position here. So what we don't want to do is something like this: 1 E and 2, right? Because when we speed that up, it has that kind of a sound to it. What we want to practice is 1 E and sorry, that was early. 1 E and 2. So holding that 1 and 2 and 1 2 1 2 1 2. So going 1 2, and you'll notice I just sped it up as I went. I started out with 16th note count, 1 E and 2. Then I went 1 and 2, and then I went 1 2 1 2. So getting that big movement, and you can start with smaller movements. I mean, maybe for you the hard thing is something like, going, like that. And when you have guide fingers as an option, go ahead and use them. And you may decide, okay, that fingering doesn't work, and you try out a different fingering like this. You could put a guide fingering in there, or you might do something like that with a guide. But let's say that's not an option, and you need to actually do a true jump. I think that's the real challenge. If the fingerings allow you to avoid a leap and it's musically pleasant, go for it. But let's assume in this case we had to leap. So those are kind of some 4 ideas to ruminate on, to think about in your playing. Of course, it has to bother you to want to fix these things. So the first thing you should do is maybe play your piece and listen very carefully, or better yet, record yourself and listen for things where, like, we have these big gaps, or notes are cut short. We get kind of ugly sounds in between, and you're going to go in and you're going to fix that, and all that's going to do is make you a better player. So I hope you find these tips useful. Probably this will come up more and more in the context of other things that I talk about. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments section. If you're enjoying the series so far, one of the best things you can do is just to subscribe. It helps support the channel and grow. And if you are so inclined, you're also welcome to become a Patreon. I put a Patreon link in my description. So as you're playing your pieces, think about where you would like things to be more legato. Try some of these ideas out. I think maybe the first step is that it just needs to bother you if you want something to be legato and that's not coming across. And then you start thinking about these things and incorporating. It does get easier and easier and easier over time. Happy looting, and I'll see you next week.